So welcome back, everyone. Hope you learned a lot at the last activity you just did and had fun. Our next keynote speaker is Sohaib Ahmed. He is one of our co-founders at 99.9, a company that prepares dedicated students to score above the 99 percentile, 173 out of 180, on the LSATs by focusing primarily on understanding content and reasoning. He specializes in understanding how the LSAT works, the skills a student needs in order to ace the test, and in identifying why a student is not able to score well, and fixing it. And with that, let's give Sohaib a big warm welcome.
Hey everyone, how's everybody doing? And you guys can unmute and say hi if you would like to.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi.
We have 65 people here. That is crazy. Okay, so we're gonna jump into the LSAT stuff and talk about like, what is it? Why is it important? How do you do well? What do you need to know? And like any questions you have, like I'll answer all of them. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen and get the PowerPoint. Let me know when you guys can see it. Yeah, and you can see these?
Yeah, now. Yep.
There we go, perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to talk about do's and don'ts, right? And obviously, before we get to do's and don'ts, we'll also talk about what is the LSAT, right? And if anybody has questions in the meantime, like you can unmute and ask, or you can also just like throw them in the chat and I will look at them. Okay, so let us begin. Obviously, it is a test, right? What you kind of need to know for it is, you know, like how your test is scored 0 to 100 sometimes, or it's out of 20. This test is between 120 to like 180, right? That's kind of like the scoring range for it. In terms of the sections, go ahead. Oh, sorry, there was some disturbance, but that's okay. Yeah, so there are kind of like 6 sections on this test. Each section is like 35 minutes, but what you kind of need to know is like, off those 6 sections, only 4 are scored. The other 2 are not scored. One of them is like a random section that they will throw in, but they won't tell you that it's not scored, right? So you never know that it's not scored. So you kind of like look at those sections as if it's scored and you just go normally about it, right? So again, 6 sections, 4 are scored. 2 of them are LR, right? So LR is like logical reasoning. And, you know, as the words tell you, you have to reason logically through it. Well, technically you have to do that across the test, but like these are like small paragraphs. You look at the argument and you kind of have to figure out, okay, what's wrong with this? Okay, so very simple and straightforward. The second section is the analytical reasoning section, right? So analyzing, right, the reasoning behind whatever you're picking. That's what this section is about. If some of you checked out the Discord, I posted a PDF just now. It didn't upload yesterday for some reason. But essentially these are called like logic games, right? So once you understand logic, you can turn it into a game, right? And if you play the game and win, then you get into law school. And the last one is reading comprehension, right? So if anybody has seen the SAT before, right, or any other reading comp, right, this is very similar to it in terms of structure. But what's different here is kind of like the sort of content you're going to be given in the paragraph or like the entire passage, right? And so what your job is going to be to figure out like, okay, what is this dude saying, right? What is he not saying? And every answer that you pick obviously has to be from the, you know, the passage that is read it comp. Okay, so what's the other thing you need to know? So obviously we know the score range, right? We know what's in it. The third thing is kind of like that most of the Canadian and US schools need the LSAT in order for you to get in, right? There's a minimum range of scores, and like based off of the score, you can sort of determine like what school you get into, right? And we're gonna get into that, but like know this, like when you're applying for law schools, right, apart from your GPA from your university, right, unless you're doing a law school instead of a undergrad degree, which is completely fine, like an undergrad law school, you do need the LSAT, okay? So let's move on to the next part, which is, what does the score mean? What does the 120 to 180 mean, right? And like, where should you score? What should you aim for? That sort of thing. So think of it this way. Most of the Canadian schools, right? So we're looking at if you're looking in Toronto, you have U of T, right? You have Osgoode, and very soon Ryerson will be coming up with the school. I think they started this year, right? There's schools here, and then across Ontario, and of course across all of Canada. The kind of score range you need out of the 180 is 153 to 160, generally speaking, right? Obviously, lower score, if you think about it, means a lot of people will be scoring lower, right? And so that's not really the ideal school to go to, somewhat, at least in my opinion, right? Because if you're going to law school, then go to a good one so that when you come out, you don't have to struggle for jobs and stuff like that, right? The higher the score, the more competitive it gets, obviously, but that's completely okay. We're going to talk about like why this is not a big deal, right? And essentially, if you're scoring within this range or above this range, you're good. If you're scoring below this range, it's really not a problem. You can just like take the test again, right? But all you need to do is it tells you like, oh, you're maybe not performing as well as you should be. Okay. So generally speaking, I guess to give you a framework of like where you should be, the top tiered schools, U of T is one of them. Harvard is another one. Yale, Stanford, right? Those are in the US, obviously. They look for somewhere between 160 to 170. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, which are the top three, right? And like if you want to add Columbia to it, right? Think of these as like the top four. Don't need to remember the names, right? They basically look for, if you want to be competitive, 176, 173 to 176, like to apply and get in. Even at that point, like it is competitive. They will look at other people and sort of determine where you are. Now, in the chat, if somebody can go like, holy crap, this sounds crazy. That's a high score. Go for it. Oh, and Mahi Patel was asking like, oh, are these sections usually scored or is it chosen by random? Like, so think of it this way. Which section is not scored is random, but generally 4 will be scored. And they know that, but we don't know that, if that makes sense, right? So let's say you start with LR first. So you can have LR, the next section is AR, next section is LR, RC, LR, right? Now, remember earlier that I was saying there are two LR sections. So if you see that there are 3 LR sections in your thing, you know for sure that one of them is the one that is not going to be scored, but at the same time, you don't know which one is not scored. So you will still approach them as if it's okay. You don't worry about like, oh, is it like being scored or not being scored? Okay. So yeah, people are like, holy crap, that sounds crazy. I know, right? But let's talk about like, what have you heard about the LSAT so far, right? Like, have you heard that it is hard, right? People think it's hard, right? Again, in the chat, go for it. If you don't know anything, you can just throw that in. Like, have never heard of this test ever before. Yeah, really, really hard. Many people have to do it more than once. Exactly, right? The option choices are confusing. Yes. It's stressful? Yeah. Time is a problem. Great. Like, love your answers. This is what some people say, or like a lot of people say, right? Anyone can do it like untimed, but it's like really hard timed, right? All you need to do is like a lot of practice for this test, right? You've heard of this before, right? Abstract questions. Yeah, exactly, right? Jim Lee is saying abstract questions. Then we say like, oh, you can only be good at RC and LR if you read a lot, right? Oh, read The Economist and like read the, the New York Times, right? And then people say like, oh, most people can't get a 170. Like, you can try, but you won't, because like really the genius people get it, right? And who's heard about like, oh, you need 6 months to prepare for this test, right? Again, in the chat, go for it. Like, give a thumbs up or just, yeah. Anybody heard of this? Yeah, exactly, right? 6 months to prepare, 4 months to prepare, 2 months to prepare. Exactly. So let's kind of like dive into this. So what do I say? Like, what does it take to score 170, right? Lots of prep tests, right? Going through most of like the company's prep books, right? Whatever is available, you just take up all the content, read New York Times, Economist every day, right? You have to be a genius, right? Or like at least like very highly intelligent. You need luck to an extent to get there, right? Like, who agrees with this? Like in the chat, just again, give a thumbs up or a yes or something, right? This all makes sense, right? Yeah, yes, no. No, exactly, right? You haven't got me. Yes. You don't need these things, right? You don't need a lot of prep tests. In fact, if I'll give you like an idea of it, so far in total, there are 90 all prep tests is like all pass tests that they do. Okay, there are 90 in total. People like doing 40. I would say you can go in doing maybe even just 5 to get yourself like familiarized with it, right? So yeah, 40. Because you know what people do? People like so as for people, what people do is like they will literally take a test a day, right? And it's crazy, but that's not the way to approach the test. It's not about doing tests, and I'm gonna jump into that in just a bit, right? Going through most people's prep books, like okay, so I don't know if you know this. I should have mentioned this earlier. There isn't, from the way that it's said, nobody has content for this. What people do is use the test's questions to study for the test, right? And although in theory that sounds good, the problem with that is, again, just people get into this mentality of like, let me do questions, one more questions, two more questions, right? Oh, got this wrong, one more question, right? Reading New York Times and Economist every day, like, I'm going to tell you this does not help at all. You will hear this like every single place. This does not help at all. Don't do it. It will waste your time. I will give you another strategy to sort of like work around this, and we'll get there. You don't need to be a genius, right? You don't need a high GPA. You just need to do the work, right? And we're going to come back to this. Luck to an extent. I mean, luck is helpful, right? If you come across a game that you've kind of done before, but do you need it? No, you just need to like understand your stuff well, and you'll be fine. And I know like I'm making it sound easy, but it's kind of because it is if you know your stuff, which I guess is the case with everything. But that's okay. We're going to come back to that. Here's what you really need. The top of the list is mindset, right? You need to have the right mindset. We're going to come back to it. There's the knowing category, there's the thinking category, listening category, and working category. Okay, so all these 5 things are technically like what you need in order to do well. All right. Yeah. So let's talk about what is mindset. I'm going to tell you this. For this test, if let's say you show up 2 days before the test and you tell me like, oh, my test is in 2 days, I'm freaking out, I don't know anything, what is the first thing I will tell you? It is going to be like, you need to have the right attitude towards both the test, towards failing and doing well, and like you can't freak out or panic, right? That sort of thing. One thing that happens is this. If you see like students going through the questions and they get a question wrong, the first thing they're going to say is like, oh my God, I'm pretty sure like I was right and the test was wrong. Like, is there anybody like who's done that before? Somewhat? Yeah, kind of. So like generally my approach is like, don't question / disrespect the test, you know, like disrespect in the elderly terms, right? You got to aim to learn from it. And I know like right now it sounds easy to do, but in the test, this becomes difficult when you're frustrated, and that's okay, right? But as like a general principle, our aim is always like, okay, if I got a question wrong, that tells me there's something I don't know. If I fix what I don't know, I'll get it right? Not getting frustrated. Okay, so I'll tell you this. Out of the 100% of the students that I've taught so far, out of them, 95% of them get frustrated, right? And that's okay, right? Getting frustrated is like, it's expected to get frustrated, but like you also should expect that you will fail. Cause like, if you think about it in a meta way, if you're expecting to like get it right the first time, then like, don't you think like very highly of yourself, right? You know what I mean? So, yeah, so expect that you'll fail. Expect that it's not going to go well, unless of course you work on the things that are making you fail in order to do well, right? We'll look at a question like later on, and that'll become like a little bit easier afterwards, right? Oh, this is going to be like super important. And if you think about it, kind of like lines up with what I was saying. Think more, do less, right? Which is, when you do a question, you really need to pause and ask yourself like, okay, what is it that we're talking about here? This is not math, right? And so like, if you think about the approach to math, people go like, oh, just do, again, I'll drill the questions and like, I'll be okay, right? Not in this specific case. Or like, I would say generally like, not in any test, but for the LSAT, yeah, don't do that, right? aim for perfection. Okay. The reason why I framed it as like, yes, you can score 180 is because one, you can, and two, if you don't frame it that way, you're not going to score high anyway. What people do is people go like, okay, U of T needs 165. I'll aim for 165. What do they end up getting? 147. So I think like in the chat, somebody talked about, oh, you have to take tests many different times. This is why. The people who like kind of aim towards it this way will end up scoring low. And so they'll do it multiple times. And that, yes, maybe eventually they will get there, right? But the first time around or the first few times around, they won't be able to score as high as they should be. Okay. Untimed first. So this is like more so a strategy, but like in your mindset, you do kind of need to accept this part, which is, again, when people take a test, in their mind, they go from normal thinking to, oh, it's a test, let's go, go, go. It's kind of like in their mind, it's a race. You know what I mean? Like if I tell you, oh yeah, this is a 35-minute section, what you will do or attempt to do is do all the questions in 35 minutes. But in your mind, how can you do it timed, like when you don't know this stuff at all at first, right? So approach is take as much time as you want, think your way through it, do it untimed, and then see like, am I like, what is it still that I'm getting wrong? Because if you think about it this way, if let's say there are 10 questions you're getting wrong untimed, that tells you for sure, like regardless of the time is not the issue. These are the 10 things I definitely need to work on, right? Then when we get to the time stuff, let's say, then when you start getting questions wrong, at that point, you know, it's because of the time, because we've removed all the other variables, right? So we're going to come back to that in a bit. Yeah, so LSAT, relevant knowledge. So just to give you context, we just talked about the mindset. We're talking about the knowing now, right? What do you need to know? So obviously the test isn't a crapshoot, right? There is some core content, even though everybody says that there isn't, right? With us, what we did was we actually studied all of the 90 tests, right? And like when I say study, it's not about like taking the test, like I've taken them like multiple times, but it's more so we were looking at it from the sense of like, okay, what do they want from students in general, like skill set and core things, like that sort of thing. And like what emerged out of that was, one thing you need to know is like argumentative structure. So who here in the chat knows what an argument is? I will look at the second response that comes in. Go. Whatever comes to mind. What is an argument? Is it just like, if you can say it in conclusion premise terms, if you don't know, it doesn't matter, just in your own terms, it's all good. Waiting, I think people are typing. Yep, it's a point of view. Okay. An argument is a point you make. Good. Position you take on a subject. Okay. Mix of opinion and fact. Perfect. I love that answer. All right. So the first one who said it's a point of view. See, the thing is, the point of view is just your point, which is the conclusion. It is part of the argument, but it's not the argument as a whole. If you want to think about it, when you're arguing with something, right? The idea there is like you're saying you want to say something, and then behind that you want to say like why. Otherwise, like let's say person X is here, person Y is here, and if they say like, oh, I think the sky is blue, the other person says, I think the sky is yellow, right? That's not really an argument. That's just a disagreement, right? An argument is, oh, I think the sky is blue because, and then the other person says, no, I don't really think you're right because, right? And notice, like, again, there's a point, and then there is this premise at the core sense, at the smaller sense, that's an argument, right? Like now, obviously, like you can concede, like, look, like I definitely get that you're saying the sky is blue. I get it, but blah, 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 right? So notice, like after the but, I'm talking about what's my point, and then right after that, I'll get into the why, right? But just knowing this structure and like how it works and thinking in these terms will just like make your life so much easy. Okay. Somebody asked, an argument is a point you make to prove you're correct. Yes, you do need that point for sure, but you also need to say like, why is it that you're making the point, right? So conditional logic. Conditional logic, like, okay, I will tell you this one thing. This is going to be, I'm going to be a bit meta and show you things that you might do in the LSAT that we'll do here. When you look at this term, conditional logic, Like at first it goes like, holy shit, like what is that? Sorry about the language, by the way. But like, holy crap, what is this thing, right? But just break the term. Look at this part, condition, right? What is a condition? Well, like, I mean, if I say something will occur in a condition, that means it doesn't occur always. It will happen at with some trigger or something, right? So when you say conditional logic, it's not just logic. It is logic that occurs under certain conditions. Like, yeah, oh, there you go. Sana says, in philosophy, we are taught that an argument consists of minimum of 2 to 3 premises. Yeah. So technically, the minimum number is 1, right? But yes, 2 to 3 is good. Like anything above that, you're all good with, right? Valid and all that stuff. Exactly. That's actually part of the argument structure that we're going to talk about. I'll talk about valid arguments later if somebody's confused, but don't worry about it, right? So conditional logic is something you need to know. And more surprisingly, this language stuff, right, that I was just referring to, like, for example, what I did with conditional logic, right? Is there anyone for whom like that just went like there was a light bulb moment the moment I said conditional logic, right? And the way I explained it? Yes, there we go. Justin, yes, right? Yeah. So if you start thinking that way, your entire mindset will switch and you won't be messed on the test at all. What happens usually is the LSAT loves giving new terminologies, right? And people go like, oh, but like I should go and memorize terms, right? My answer is no, because like, think of it this way, right? I mean, maybe you can, but most people don't want to memorize the whole dictionary, right? So the answer is actually usually within the word, right? And if you look within the word, you won't actually need like any other additional information, right? So again, look at this term, right? Argumentative structure. What is it? It's a structure. But like, what kind of structure is it? Well, it's argumentative. Let's forget the itive part, argument, right? And we just like literally broke the argument part, right? So the structure is literally what Sana was saying before, which is the structure is, oh, the premise part is the why part or the reason behind what you're saying. And then after that is the what part or the conclusion, right? Or the point you're making, right? So the structure wise, it is premise, conclusion, or like, I mean, you could go the other way and you could say conclusion, premise, or like the what and the why, or the why and the what, but same thing, it's a structure, right? And in your mind, that goes from like being abstract to, oh, I know exactly what he's talking about or she's talking about, right? So that's like the knowledge you kind of need. Obviously it gets pretty deep and there are lots of things that you kind of need to look at it, but like just to get a sense of how do you approach it, this is like a good start. Let's talk about thinking in the test, right? So this is the part where almost everybody struggles, right? And I'm 100% sure, actually 99% sure, like everybody has heard of like, oh, you need to be active, right? But who really knows what that means? And also don't look at the remainder of the bullets if you can, but like, what do you think that means usually when people say like, oh, active reading and like all that sort of stuff? Go for it in the chat when you can. Justin, Sana, Navia, Esther, Rita. Yes, people are typing. There we go. Pay extra attention to what you're doing. Being entirely present. Yeah, but think of it this way, right? When you're saying these things, don't they sound like super abstract? Like, yeah, like I am trying to pay attention to, like somebody could say like, yeah, I am trying to pay attention to the test, but like, what does that mean? Process the information while you're reading. Okay. Yeah, but again, I'm going to ask everybody this question, which is, what does that mean? Right? It needs to be present. Okay. All right. Putting in your own words in, okay. Yep, exactly. Right. So think of it this way. What you're all saying is absolutely correct. Oh, Esther, we're not going to annotate at all, actually. In fact, this is going to sound crazy and everybody's going to go like, oh, what is he talking about? When I'm preparing people for the test, you're not allowed to basically take notes. You're not allowed to even use a pencil, or the only thing you're allowed to do is kind of like just pay attention and get it. And like, I'll ask you questions. If you can answer them, then you're good. You know what I mean? Because the idea is your mind is a better annotator than a highlighter or like a pencil, and so if we can make that sharper, you'll be fine. So in any case, going back to this, yeah, people say like focus and pay attention, right? But the thing is, like, there isn't a clear how or what to do, right? And the way that we kind of approach this is we say, like, listen, being active means being engaged with what you're reading. It's as if like someone is talking to you and you're listening to them exactly, and you're like understanding what they're saying. At the same time, you remember what they said, right? So if they ask you like, oh, what did I say, right, you can say like, oh, you said XYZ. And then if they say, oh, why do you think I said that, then because you're also thinking at the same time and you're thinking through what they're saying, you can respond to that too. So like, how do you get to that stage from being inactive? The first thing, and some people say like, oh, but you can't do that in tests. But like, again, forget about the test mentality, right? Let's just skill build. You got to read out loud, right? Read out loud, use hand gestures, like have some tone while you're going, and pause, right? A lot when you're going through it. I'll give you an example. And this is going to resonate with a lot of you. Who has seen, I don't know, President, ex-President Obama give a speech, or even Trump give a speech? Yes, yes, yes. Throw in a yes if you've seen it. Yeah, exactly, right. Go for it. Oh, everybody's like, yes, absolutely. Okay, now think of it this way. These guys have to speak to a whole nation, right? And so what they really need is the nation to pay attention. Everybody's watching TV. If they like switch the channel, it's over for them, right? So the way they engage people is with their tone, right? Using hand gestures, right? Like, who does that? Trump does that, right? Trump uses hands like that, right? And of course, they're like projecting out their voice and stuff like that. You kind of have to do the same thing to yourself such that you're keeping yourself engaged, right? And one of the things you can do is like record yourself with an audio. And then if you're like sounding boring to yourself, then other people won't be engaged either, right? That's like one of the ways to do it. In fact, like if you think about it, I watched like quite a few of like Obama speeches, right? And so whenever he's talking, like you will hear his tone. He will talk something like this, like, see, the thing is, what I really think you're saying is just not true, right? You see what I mean? And so what he's doing is he's having these smaller sentences, right? Smaller digestible sentences, and then notice that he's like said his point, which is, I don't think what you're saying is true, right? And from there, he'll go into the why, right? So that part ties into like, you need to rephrase everything such that you can actually say it in your own language as opposed to like the way that they're saying it. They're making it sound hard, make it easy. They sound easy, no, make it easier, right? You know what I mean? This, when you are doing the reading out loud, you're rephrasing everything, you're engaging with the argument. At this point, if you can predict, just think about what I'm saying. If you can predict the passage, right, as in what's going to show up later on, and you can predict the possible answers, that will get you a 180, right? Who would be mind blown if I later showed you that you could predict the content of the entire passage, like at least in a general outline terms, right? Before you even start, like before you even finish the first paragraph, right? Say yes, 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 if you agree with that, right? If you want me to show that later on. In fact, I'm gonna give you something that blew my mind, which is, so my colleague slash friend, like who works with me over here at 99.9, right? She can do passages without reading the passages. She will score perfect on it, right? When you go through it. And if that sounds crazy, what you'll do is, if let's say you give her your questions and you say, oh, like, here's my test, here's what I got wrong. After looking at the first 3 or 4 things that you're doing wrong, she will be able to predict almost 90% of the times what you chose as your answer before knowing it. So first 5 times she'll see like, oh, you chose B over here, why'd you choose it, blah, blah. And then after that, she will literally say like, oh, did he select like C for the answer? Yeah, holy Deb, yes, that's exactly how I feel about it, right? Yeah, it is. But if you think about it, that's kind of like what she's doing is at a very high level, understanding the argument. In your mind, how are you thinking? So once she understands that, then she applies that to the next question, and guess what? She's right? And we'll come back to this. That's like one of the highest levels that I've seen so far right? No surprise, she taught me how to do the LSAT way back then. But anyway, so the other way to make it easy for yourself is give yourself examples, like a ton of them, right? And like easy, simple examples. For example, I was doing the argumentative structure thing, right? So this was a comparatively harder term, argumentative structure. The example you can give yourself is like, oh, because I don't know, there's a light bulb, therefore there's light, right? Something like that. That is an example of an argument. And then you go like, okay, what's the structure in the argument? Because there's light bulb, that part is a reason, and therefore there is light. That's the point. I mean, you could also say it in a different way, which is, oh, there's light. Why? Because there's a light bulb. See, I'm saying the same thing. That's structure. And notice we go back, which is this term, argumentative structure, was difficult to understand at first, and it seemed like it didn't click, right? But the moment you give yourself examples, it clicks. Okay. The other way to do really well is it's not about the answers, right? And I guess this kind of should have been in the mindset thing a little bit. Our preparation is not about getting to the answer ever. Our thing is, do we know every single time why the wrong answer is wrong and the right answer is right? Right? And like you have to think in those terms, like, okay, what is it specifically that you're doing? It's not about like, oh, do you think that it's wrong, or like I feel it's wrong, but you have to know, right? And like, I mean, with like what I did, I basically like wrote out rules for, oh, if they do this, then the answer is going to be wrong. If they do X, then the answer is going to be wrong, right? The other thing is you also have to explain why the right answer is right. Because again, it doesn't matter that you picked an answer, right? It matters like, why did you pick it? And like, did you pick it for the right reasons? So if often what happens is you will pick an answer, turns out it's right, you explain it, but turns out the explanation was leading you to the thing where it seemed like the right answer was not right. And then you look back at the answers and you realize, oh, I looked at the wrong answer. In fact, that answer was wrong, right? You know what I mean? So the explanation will always, if it's correct, will always lead you to the right thing. The other thing is don't rush, right? Who is it that has felt the urge to go fast when you're taking a test? Anybody? Yeah, Raju, right? Yeah. And you know how some people say like, oh, in the first minute, just peace out and like look around you and be chill, and then like after that 1 minute then jump into it, right? That's kind of the approach here. Because see, what's happening is like in your mind is like, think of it as, you know, a clock working. And I don't know if we want to make it look sophisticated, or, you know, anyway, let's say your mind is working, right? The moment it starts working, the space for thinking reduces a little bit if you're just in a doing mode. And so the idea there is you stop the doing for a minute and you go like, give me like empty space in my mind to go like, what is it that I'm doing? And like, am I doing the right thing? Because often you'll do something and you'll realize, oh, but I didn't even like address the question, or like I didn't even read, like what the hell was I reading? Right? Exactly. Pressure. Yeah. So the way to again do that is you just tell yourself like, stop, forget about the 35 minutes. Right? Exactly. So so that is like thinking in the test. These are like, again, the core principles that you kind of like, we start preparing like this. So imagine what happens like when we're in the middle of it. This is going to be crazy. So you need to listen, right? And the reason I say this is, look, when you become lawyers, right, you need to listen to your clients. You need to listen to whoever's like your colleagues and whoever you're working for. Same way over here in the test, like to listen in a way, this is going to sound crazy, is a skill. Like you're not only listening to like obviously what they're saying, but you're engaging with it and you're kind of seeing like where they're going, that sort of thing. If you build that skill here with the test, where you're listening to the test makers, right? The people who obviously wrote the passage, and then you're like within the passage, you're listening to the author, and then you're listening to your test results, where you're looking at it and going like, okay, what does that mean for me? That will change your outlook. So what does that mean? Okay, so when I say listening to the test makers, remember the thing that I told you about? Like we went through like all the tests and we were looking at, okay, what is really going on? What we were doing was, in our minds, it was like, listen, the test makers they're not like super geniuses that just come up with a new formula every time. It is a standardized test. It has to be consistent across the years, right? And like everybody has to be able to do it. So they have some formula somewhere, right? Looking across different questions, can we pull out that formula, right? So like we're reverse thinking a little bit, right? The other part of it is there is a certain way that people respond to things. For example, okay, tell me the first word that comes to mind when you think of a button, like like this button over here on the screen, any button. What's the first word that comes to mind? Push, click, exactly, yeah. Click, yep, press, good. Okay, cute. Okay, that works. Yeah, so notice this. In the response that I just got, click and push are pretty common, right? So they know this part. They know these patterns of thinking. Like obviously, with the button, it's completely fine. But again, they also know people judge other people based on opinion. And they don't really think about like where they don't really think about reasoning. You know what I mean? And so for that reason, they will give you trap answers, right? That they know that you will be very tempted to take because it really sounds good, right? And so what we're doing is we're going a level above and we're looking at the wrong answer and being like, oh, is this a trap? Right? And it'll sort of like fall in that trap category, and then you will just know like ahead of time, right? Like what it is, and very easily you'll go like, aha, I see that was a trap. Okay, we'll come back to this, and like I'll illustrate this later. Listening to the author, right, and not necessarily the passage. What does that mean? So in my mind, when I'm reading a passage, I am speaking or listening to this guy. Okay, so if you ever see me read a passage, I will be commenting on stuff as I'm reading, which is like, so let's say the author says, oh, because the sky is blue, everybody else thinks that's blue. Let's say this in the past, it will never be the case. But let's say he says this. At the end of it, I will just add the comment like, yeah, no shit, that makes sense. There's nothing to it. Instead of just continuing to read. Notice what am I doing? I'm pausing. I am inserting like my own voice a little bit. And it's as if I'm talking to the guy, right? So listening and talking at the same time. What does that do? So again, look at this thing, right? This example here, which is some people think coffee is great. Pause for a second, right? And imagine the author is saying that. Some people think coffee is great. What do you think the author thinks? In the chat, go for it. Exactly. It's not great. The opposite. Yeah? Good. Now, think of it this way. The surprising part is if I ask this from like undergrad people, for the most part, they won't be able to answer this. So it's very nice, like for those who come up with this, that you did, it is something that people don't notice immediately. For those of you who didn't know, that's okay, right? Because all you need to think is, look, do you ever, let's say you like pizza. When you go to somebody, do you say like, oh, some people say pizza is great? Or do you say like, I think pizza is great? You see what I mean? Right? Yeah. So I think pizza is great. And so whenever you see this, like some people say part, this is one of those tropes. Like whenever you see it, you can predict what the rest of the sentence is going to be, and you can have an idea of, yeah, I know we should order pizza, but we should basically sort of, I lost my train of thought there, but yeah, that sort of gives us an idea of like where again the passage is going to go. Okay, listening to the results again, same idea, which is if you're doing everything so far and you get a question wrong, what that means is somewhere along the line you thought you were doing the right thing but you weren't, or you're missing obviously something. You need to stop, you need to go figure it out, right? At this point, do you think how do you think is the best way to figure it out? Say yes in the chat if you think we can just go Google it and find the ways to like find the answer on Google for whatever you got wrong. Friend says no. Anybody else? Like, should we like Google it and find out, like, let's say answer choice A is wrong. And, you know, from the top of my head, I don't really know why it's wrong. Should I Google it? I don't think Google's smart. Yeah, but like, let's say people have responded, don't think so, maybe in a textbook. Or let's say like referring to other things. Even if, let's say I have a book that is given by the LSAT itself, right? Should I go and have a look at it and go like, okay, so why did I get it wrong? So Sana says, I'd argue that you might be able to find a person's opinion that might be insightful. Yes. So basically, here's my take on it. Of course, if you go somewhere, so we're gonna talk about forums in just a bit, right? But let's say it is the LSAT's book. If I go and find the answer and read through the reasoning, I know for sure what my response is going to be, which is like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But does that mean I get it enough that I won't make that mistake again? And the answer is no, I definitely won't, right? So the answer is, look, even if you're stuck on that answer choice for 6 hours, go walk around, think about like, did you get the argument? Like, did you understand what the guy was saying? Did you understand what the question was saying? And did you understand what the answer choice was saying? Somewhere along those lines, there's something you haven't understood. If you find out what you haven't understood, you'll come to the right answer. Maybe something that's different than what they've written, but it's still valid and always gets you to the right answer still, right? And so what that will do is when you go to the next question, it's going to be kind of like a snowball effect, right? Where you will just get it right, and then you'll just get it right. So like in my LSAT classes, when I'm teaching, sometimes a person isn't given an answer for 8 hours, right? And I'll tell them like, go sit in the corner, figure it out. You come back and you tell me, right? And sometimes a little bit harsh, and they'll come back and they'll be like, oh, is it this? And I see that they're trying to sometimes like just get the answer, and I'll go like, nope, right? And sometimes I am a little bit savage where they will come up with the right answer, and I'll still say nope, right? And then they'll go back, and they'll come back after 2 hours, and they'll go like, no, I really think this is the right answer. At that point, I will say yes, because what I'm looking for is like internal surety of like, you have to internally feel like, no, what I'm saying is correct because of the reasoning itself. Make sense? Right? You can comment on that in the chat if you want. But yes, I know it is pretty savvy. Okay, so finally, actually working. Now, think of it this way. So this is, notice like a lot of introspection is involved here, right? Yeah, to get to the dream school, Justin, right? Think of it this way. If I don't do that, the person who is really putting in the hours to, let's say, get to U of T or even get to Harvard, right? They just won't. And I'm otherwise giving them a false sense of security by giving them the answer. And so if they build that idea of like internally trusting their own voice and reasoning correctly, then they will just get it right every time, which means they will just in the test just do really well. And like even beyond the test, it's not about the test, it's about, again, the skills, right? So let's talk about finally actually working, right? So when you're studying, or like when you say you're studying super hard, are you actually studying? Again, in the comment box, go for it, right? Are you actually legitimately studying every single second of the time? Manigo, yeah, sometimes less is more. Yeah, but like, okay, so I'll rephrase this. It's the day before your exam and you're studying. You say, I'm studying super hard. That's super hard compared to other times when you say, oh yeah, I'm studying super hard. Are they the same? Yes or no? In the comment box, go for it. Definitely not. Yeah, exactly, right? Yes. And the thing is like, I think one thing that's wrong with like generally the education system is this thing is not embraced. Like, it's okay. Like, we know that you're not studying that well, but like internally, what you kind of have to do is recognize that you're not doing that and sort of like deal with it in a way, right? So one of the things is this, like when people say like, oh, is it okay if I go to work and then come back and study for things? My general answer for like, if you want to do great, like, no, don't do that. That's not going to be enough. You'll forget things, or it will just make you take a lot more time, right? Other times what people say is like, oh, I was studying at a library and like I was feeling bored, so I should switch locations because that will help, right? If somebody has heard of that. or like switching chairs. This happens a lot in undergrad. But in any case, that seems to help, but not really. It is super distracting because think of it this way: you were studying, then you pack your bags, you walk all the way, go to the other side, then you open up everything, put your laptop, right, get your coffee, speak to a friend, and then you sit down. You've lost maybe half an hour to an hour just doing that, right? You do that 3 times while you're studying during the day, and you lost 3 hours. Now, it might not be 3 hours, it might be 1.5 hours, but the biggest thing that it stops is that train of thought that you had earlier while you were doing the concept, right? Now, doing a part of concept, but leaving it before, yeah. So have you felt this in your mind? Like when you're doing something hard, in your mind, you want to just go like, oh, I'll come back to this later. Yeah? Anybody? Yeah, right? We don't do that anymore. So like whenever you're stuck, in fact, we're actively trying to find every single thing that is kind of like bugging you or you don't know it that well. If we fix every single instance of that time, you'll be fine. Okay? So I'll skip the other 2 parts, which are, again, very simple stuff, which is don't review the stuff you already know, right? Find out, again, what you don't know. And the other one is don't take the test if you're not ready, obviously. But again, what do people do? They will sign up for a test. They will not be ready. But because they've signed up for the test and paid for it, they will go take it. The problem there is the score goes on your transcript. And law schools know that, oh, this time you didn't prepare for it. You know what I mean? And that kind of just messes you up. So instead, like, you just got to sit down and do the work, right? Here is what that means. So what I'm going to do is go to the Discord and pull out that test that I was talking about. Actually, before we jump into that, let's jump into some questions, right? And we'll look at the test in a bit. But I can just show you over here that this is generally the AR section, the logic game section, right? I will come back to Lena's question in just a bit. Amy or Lauren. So at this point, like, do you want to do like questions now, or like what are you thinking of? Because this is technically the last slide. We can go into one of the questions and go from there. And in the chat, you guys can also throw in like, what would you like to do next?
Yeah, I think we can go into questions.
Cool.
So everyone can, you can decide if you want everyone to if you want them to unmute and answer the question, or if you want them to.
Yeah, so I think post the questions in the thread, right? And then I'll just say your name and then you can unmute it and we can go from there. So I do see a question from Lena, right? So Lena, you can unmute yourself and share your question with everybody and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the times my teachers tell me that the best way to study is to take short, frequent breaks. It's like they recommend studying for 20 minutes and then take like a 5 to 10 minute break. So every 20 minutes you study, and they say that if you're ever stuck on something, then just move on and come back to it. So after kind of what you were saying, is that something you recommend, or am I just kind of missing the whole idea of?
So the way that I like looking at this is from a problem and solutions point of view. So if you're stuck on something, I would want to think about like, why is it that you're stuck? Like, is it that you're conceptually not getting the thing, or are you just tired at that moment? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what is the actual issue underlying the getting stuck? Now, some of the times what happens is that it indicates that people don't know how to think, especially this happens at the LSAT as well. Like when you're doing this logic game, the one that's on the screen at the moment, right? People just go and look at it and they'll just pause. And though they are thinking, right, they don't exactly know how to approach it. And so notice that it's the getting stuck part. My solution to that is, that means the framework isn't there to solve this question or these types of questions. And I'll jump into that and make sure like that framework is good. And I'll tell you like, listen, every time you get stuck, do this. Every time you get stuck, do this, right? So in this section, by the way, like have a look at this. You know, those first 2 lines where it says, oh, a company employee generates a series of this. That's kind of like the passage. And then the other 5 lines, the code used is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the rules, okay? So we won't get into the specifics right now, but the idea over here is, what I tell my students is, every time you're stuck, go back to the rules and think about what rule applies to the thing that you're doing. And so by that definition, you will just never get stuck. Does that maybe help?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, let's look at Sarah's question. Hi, Sarah. Oh, Sana, I'll come back to you in just a bit.
Hello.
Hi.
So
Yeah, go for it.
I had two questions.
Mhm.
One was just in terms of how affordable your courses are, because I heard that, a lot of LSAT prep courses are really expensive, which may be, you know, lead to some students not being able to score as high because they weren't able to get the proper prep because they couldn't
Yes.
afford it. So how affordable are your courses?
Yeah. So, knowing the industry, I would say that it's definitely on the more affordable end, right? But here's a way to think about it. So, I'm an ex-student now, right? The reason why we created our company was because like I've taken prep tests or like prep from like other companies, and then you see this idea of like all they do is you go in and there's an instructor there. They'll just like literally either read from the book or say some concept. They don't really attend to you completely, right? They don't really solve your problems, and then class is over and you're supposed to do your own whole own thing, right? Our thing is very different in that when you are in the class, in my mind, I'm kind of accountable for you in figuring out what is it that you're specifically doing wrong, right? And my job is to tell you like, okay, no, go do X, Y, Z. And often I will even text you if that needs to be the case, right? Like, hey, get back to work, right? You're not there, that sort of thing, right? So it's I think one way you can think about it is like, what is it that you're getting out of for what you're paying? And based off of like what we do, like you can, if you don't do well, you can literally come back and redo the class if let's say for free, right? If let's say like you did work hard and it just didn't work out, for sure, right? That doesn't matter. But yeah, if you want to talk about it later, we can talk about that more. So Winnet, go for it.
All right, so I remember earlier in this presentation, you were sort of talking about how if people are in the library and they feel sort of like distracted about the whole switching spots scenario.
Yeah.
Personally, I felt the same thing before. A lot of times, I'll be in extended study sessions. I have a test tomorrow. I really need to drill a bunch of information in my head to make sure I do as best as I possibly can. So I'll find that in extended sessions, I'll be not really dozing off, but like I'll start be getting off traffic. I'll want to take out my phone. I'll just be doodling on my paper. So I noticed that for me, I go to another end of the library, or I just switch my location. And let's say that takes like on an odd scenario that takes like 30 to 45 minutes, which you were saying that like you could sometimes you'll like pack your things. I'll take time, drink some coffee, talk to a friend, but more so my whole study philosophy is more so revolved around perfect practice makes perfect, not practice makes perfect. It's all about efficiency and not more so about the actual amount of time you actually spend on it. So if that cost of the 30 to 45 minutes saves me the amount of efficient studying time that it would take for me to stay in that like sort of null state where I'm sort of drifting off, wouldn't it be worth it?
Yeah. So I guess think of it this way. So I guess I'll qualify. The things that I'm saying are wrong aren't exactly wrong, right? There's a degree of like, yeah, there's this thing you can do, and here's like, you can do it better. What I'm saying is this, like in that moment, when you're feeling that way where you want to go to your phone, right? That indicates like on the interest level, you're not super into the thing that you're doing. You know what I mean? Right? Because if you were, let's say, tell me something you absolutely love doing. Let's say gaming. Do you game by any chance?
Yeah.
Right? If it were gaming, you never pull out your phone and start texting. Right? You know what I mean?
Well, so see, the situation for me is like in the sort of scenario I'm talking about, I'm talking more so about burnout, more so compared to losing interest, because everyone has their limits. If you do anything for too much of an amount of time, you're gonna get burned out eventually.
Yes and no. So I have a very radical view on this. Think of it this way. Yeah. So regarding the burnout thing, I know a lot of people say it. I know about the work-life balance and all that sort of stuff, right? So far, I've run 2 or 3 companies so far with this thing that I do. There are days where I'm awake for 60 hours, right? Because I need to be present on the floor to make things happen.
Yeah.
But if at that point afterwards I say, oh, I'm burned out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't say that I'm burnt out. Like I might be tired and I'll go to bed afterwards, right? But I won't put a limit on myself, because the moment I will say that, oh, I'm burnt out, like internally something changes, right? And I keep challenging that idea, like, am I really though, right? Or is it like that I'm losing interest, or is it like that I can take a week break and then I can come back and like go hard again? You know what I mean? So I don't want to. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting, but I still review as like you saying that it kind of like flips a switch in you mentally, and it's sort of like psychological block, saying it restricts you from getting more done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so I think we're going to cut it here because
yeah.
I am running out of time. And
Apologies.
Amy, no worries at all. And Amy, over to you. Everybody else, like I saw your questions. Come talk to me afterwards.